Welcome to HOA Karen Patrol. Keep your phone ready for this one. My name is Ryan. I am an auto body shop estimator in Bend, Oregon, and the HOA president is standing in my driveway right now, screaming that my car is getting towed in 10 minutes if I do not move it, even though I am parked in my own assigned spot with a valid temporary permit in the windshield. I moved to Bend 6 months ago for the job in the mountains, and Foxglove Falls Estates Association looked perfect online. But within 2 weeks, I realized this HOA was not about rules. It was about who you knew. Certain homes got away with everything. Late fees waived, violations ignored, guest cars parked on the street for days. But if you were not in the inner circle, they came after you hard. My car is essential for my commute. I drive to the shop every morning at 6, and I cannot afford to lose it or rack up towing fees. And right now, the HOA is threatening to revoke my parking permit immediately, and I need proof before it happens. The woman yelling at me is Deborah Moore, social committee chair, who spreads rumors faster than anyone I have ever met, and she has decided that my temporary paper permit does not count. I say, Deborah, it is right there in the windshield. It has the association logo. It has my unit number. It is valid until next week, when the permanent decal arrives. She says, I do not care what you think. I care what the rule says. That paper is not an official decal, and the rule says all vehicles must display an official decal. No decal, no parking. I say, the management company issued this permit. They told me it is valid. She says, we can tow first and explain later. That is how enforcement works. I feel my jaw tighten. I say, you are seriously going to tow my car out of my own driveway over a temporary permit that your own management company gave me? She says, the rules apply to everyone, and I am enforcing them. You have 10 minutes. Then she turns and walks back toward the clubhouse parking lot, and I see a tow truck idling near the entrance gate with its amber lights flashing in the after-rain puddles. I pull out my phone and text my neighbor Marcus, who has lived here for 3 years and warned me about Deborah the day I moved in. He is a quiet neighbor who saved screenshots of Deborah's posts and messages from the neighborhood group chat, and he has been watching this HOA fall apart for months. I type, Deborah just threatened to tow my car. She says my temp permit does not count. Do you have anything on her? He texts back immediately. She has no authority to order tows. Only the management company can. I have the bylaws saved. Meet me at the mailbox cluster in 5. I grab my keys and my phone, and I head out, and I see Deborah standing by the tow truck, talking to the driver and pointing at my driveway. The driver is a guy in his 20s with a company shirt and a winch cable stretched tight across the frame of his truck. And he is nodding and looking at a clipboard. I do not know if he is about to hook my car or if he is waiting for the signal, but I need to stop this before it goes any further. I walk over and I say, excuse me, who authorized this tow? The driver looks at Deborah, and she says, I did, under Association Enforcement Authority. I say, do you have a signed tow authorization from the property management company? She says, I do not need one. I am the social committee chair, and I have enforcement authority. I say, that is not how it works. The bylaws say only the management company can authorize tows, and I have a valid permit. She pulls out a tow yard claim ticket booklet she flips through with no readable text on the pages, and she says, you can argue all you want, but once the truck hooks your car, you will have to pay the fees to get it back, and that is $200 just to release it. I feel my hand shaking. I say, "You are bluffing. You do not have the authority." She smiles and says, "Try me." The driver says, "Ma'am, if there is a dispute, I usually wait for a signed authorization before I hook." Deborah snaps at him, "I just gave you verbal authorization. That is enough." The driver hesitates, and I see him looking at his clipboard again. I say, "If you hook my car without a signed authorization, I will file a complaint with the city and your company, and I will make sure everyone in this neighborhood knows you are part of a scam." Deborah says, "It is not a scam. It is enforcement." I say, "Then show me the paperwork." She says nothing, and the driver says, "I am going to call my supervisor." Deborah glares at him, then at me, and she says, "Fine, you have until tomorrow morning. But if that decal is not official by then, your car is gone." She turns and walks away, and the tow truck driver pulls out his phone and walks back toward his truck. I stand there in the driveway with my heart pounding, and I realize she just tried to bully me into paying $200 to get my own car back from my own driveway. I walk over to the mailbox cluster near the front gate, and Marcus is already there waiting. He is a white guy in his 40s with a beard and a hoodie, and he has his phone out with screenshots pulled up. He says, "She has been doing this to at least 4 other people. She targets anyone she does not like, and she misquotes the parking rules to make it sound like inches equal violations." I say, "What do you mean?" He scrolls through his phone and shows me a screenshot from the group chat where Deborah posted, quote, "Any vehicle parked more than 6 inches from the curb is in violation and subject to towing." End quote. He says, "That is not in the bylaws I checked. There is no measurement rule, but she posts stuff like this, and people believe her because she is on the board." I say, "So she is just making up rules?" He says, "Exactly, and the management company does not push back because they are scared of her. She has been here for 10 years, and she runs the social committee, which means she controls half the votes at every meeting." I say, "What do I do?" He says, "Document everything. Keep that temp permit visible, and get a copy of the parking rules from the county, because I bet the HOA is misrepresenting an ordinance in writing somewhere." I say, "How do I get that?" He says, "Call the county parking enforcement office, ask them if the HOA has any authority to set curb distance rules or decal requirements, and ask them to email you a response." I pull out my phone and I search for the Deschutes County parking enforcement number, and I call them right there in the parking lot. A woman answers, and I explain the situation, and she says, "Homeowners associations can set internal parking rules for private property, but they cannot enforce county ordinances or create penalties that exceed county code. And they definitely cannot order tows without following the procedures in their own laws." I say, "Can you email me that in writing?" She says, "Sure, give me your email, and I will send you a summary of the county code and a note about HOA limitations." I give her my email, and she says it will be in my inbox within the hour. I thank her and hang up, and Marcus says, "That is your evidence. Now you just need to catch Deborah saying something on the record that contradicts it." I say, "How?" He says, "Bait her into a conversation and record it. She loves to talk and she loves to threaten people. Just get her to say she has tow authority and that the county backs her up, and then you have her." I feel a knot in my stomach because I know Marcus is right. But I also know Deborah is not stupid, She has been doing this for years, and she knows how to stay just barely inside the rules. I say, what if she does not take the bait? Marcus says, she will, because she thinks you are scared, and that is when people like her get sloppy. I walk back to my driveway, and I see a bright orange windshield sticker that says violation without readable details stuck to my driver's side window. I did not put it there, and I know Deborah did it while I was at the mailbox. I peel it off and I take a photo of it, and I see that it is one of those generic parking violation stickers you can buy online, not an official HOA notice. I text Marcus a photo of the sticker, and I say, she just put this on my car. He texts back, that is harassment. Keep it as evidence. I fold the sticker and I put it in my jacket pocket, and I go inside and I check my email. The county response is already there, and it is exactly what I needed. The email says, quote, Deschutes County does not authorize homeowners associations to enforce parking ordinances on private property beyond the scope of their recorded bylaws, and any tow action must follow the procedures outlined in the association governing documents, end quote. I print the email and I read it 3 times, and then I forward it to Marcus. He texts back, perfect. Now you have proof that she is lying about county authority, and if she orders a tow without following the bylaws, you can file a complaint with the county and the state HOA regulatory board. I say, what about the temp permit? He says, the permit is valid. The management company issued it, and Deborah has no authority to override that, but she is going to try anyway, because she wants to make an example out of you. I say, why me? He says, because you are new, and because you did not kiss her ring when you moved in. She does this to everyone who does not play her game. I sit down at my kitchen table and I stare at the email, and I realize Deborah is not going to stop. She is going to escalate, and I need to be ready. The next morning I wake up at 5:30 and I go outside to check my car, and I see another orange sticker on the windshield, this time on the passenger side. I peel it off and I take another photo, and then I see Deborah walking through the parking lot with a clipboard and a handheld scanner pointed at license plates. She is wearing the same black light jacket and white sun hat, and she is stopping at every car and checking the decals. I walk over and I say, "Good morning, Deborah." She does not look up. She says, "Your temp permit expired." I say, "No, it did not. It is valid until next Tuesday." She says, "I checked with the management company. They say it should have been replaced by now." I say, "They told me I have until Tuesday, and I have that in writing." She finally looks at me, and she says, "Show me." I pull out my phone, and I show her the email from the management company that says my temp permit is valid until the following Tuesday. She looks at it for about 2 seconds, and then she says, "That does not matter. The rule says all vehicles must display an official decal, and paper is not official." I say, "The management company says it is." She says, "I do not care what they say. I care what the rule says." I recognize the phrase. She said it yesterday too, and I realize this is her script. This is how she justifies everything. I pull out my phone and I start recording audio in my pocket, and I say, "So you are saying the management company is wrong?" She says, "I am saying the rule is clear, and I am enforcing it." I say, "And what happens if I do not comply?" She says, "Then your car gets towed, and you pay the fees." I say, And who authorized you to order tows? She says, I have enforcement authority as social committee chair. I say, but the bylaws say only the management company can authorize tows. She waves her hand and says, that is an old version. We updated the bylaws last year, and now the board has direct enforcement authority. I feel my heart jump because I know that is not true. Marcus showed me the current bylaws, and there is no updated enforcement authority. I say, can you show me the updated bylaws? She says, they are on file at the management office. I say, can you email me a copy? She says, I do not have time for this. Just fix your permit or your car is gone. She turns and walks away, and I stop the recording. I have her on tape saying she has enforcement authority that does not exist, and I have her on tape claiming the bylaws were updated when they were not, and I have the county email that says she has no authority to enforce anything beyond the recorded bylaws. I text Marcus and I say, I got her on tape. He texts back, send it to me. I send him the audio file, and he listens to it and texts back, this is gold. She just admitted she is making up authority. Now you need to get this in front of the board. I say, how? He says, request an emergency hearing, cite the tow threat and the harassment, and force them to address it before she actually tows your car. I go back inside and I draft an email to the management company and the board, and I attach the county email, the photos of the orange stickers, and a transcript of the recording. I write, I am requesting an emergency hearing to address harassment and unauthorized tow threats by Social Committee Chair Deborah Moore. I have documented multiple violations of the bylaws and county code, and I am requesting immediate action to prevent further abuse. I hit send, and then I sit down and I wait. 2 hours later, I get a response from the management company, and it says, we have received your request, and we are scheduling a board meeting for this Thursday at 7. You will have 10 minutes to present your case. Thursday is 3 days away, and I know Deborah is going to use that time to escalate. I text Marcus and I say, meeting is Thursday. He texts back, good, I will be there, and I will bring the screenshots. I say, what if she tows my car before then? He says, park it somewhere else, or put a camera on it. I do not have anywhere else to park. The HOA rules say all vehicles must be in assigned spots or guest spaces, and the guest spaces are first come, first serve. I decide to set up my phone as a dash cam recording the driveway, and I leave it running on a loop all day while I am at work. When I get home that night, I check the footage, and I see Deborah walking up to my car twice, once in the morning and once in the afternoon, and both times she takes photos of my windshield with her phone. I also see her talking to the tow truck driver again, and he is shaking his head and pointing at his clipboard. I cannot hear the audio, but I can see that he is refusing to hook my car without a signed authorization. The next morning I wake up, and I see a notice taped to my front door. It is an official HOA violation notice with no readable text but a printed letterhead, and it says I am in violation of parking decal requirements, and I have 24 hours to comply or face towing, and a $200 fine. The notice is signed by Deborah Moore, Social Committee Chair. I take a photo of the notice and I text it to Marcus, and he texts back, she is setting up a paper trail to justify the tow. Do not comply. Just document everything and bring it to the meeting. I say, what if she tows it anyway? He says, then you call the police and you file a theft report, because without a signed authorization from the management company, it is not a legal tow. I fold the notice and I put it in my folder with the other evidence, and I go to work. All day I am checking my phone every 10 minutes to see if the dash cam is still recording, and every time I see my car still in the driveway, I feel a little bit of relief. Thursday comes and I drive to the clubhouse for the board meeting, and I see Deborah standing outside the entrance with 2 other board members, and they are talking in low voices. When I walk up, they stop talking, and Deborah gives me a smile that does not reach her eyes. She says, "I hope you are ready to apologize." I say, "Apologize for what?" She says, "For wasting everyone's time with this nonsense." I say, "We will see." I walk into the clubhouse meeting room, and I see about 15 residents already seated, including Marcus, and the board members take their seats at the front table. The board president is a man in his 60s named Gerald, and he bangs a gavel and says, "We are here for an emergency hearing requested by Ryan Carter regarding parking enforcement. Ryan, you have 10 minutes. I stand up and I walk to the front, and I pull out my folder. I say, "I am here because Deborah Moore has been harassing me with unauthorized tow threats, fake violation notices, and enforcement claims that violate the bylaws and county code." Deborah interrupts and says, "That is not true. I am enforcing the parking rules as written." Gerald says, "Deborah, let him finish." I say, "I have documentation, and I would like to present it now." I pull out the county email, and I read it out loud, and I see Deborah's face go red. I say, "This email from Deschutes County says the HOA has no authority to enforce parking ordinances beyond the recorded bylaws, and any tow action must follow the procedures in the bylaws, which require a signed authorization from the management company." I pull out the recording transcript, and I say, "I also have a recording of Deborah claiming she has enforcement authority that does not exist, and claiming the bylaws were updated when they were not." Gerald says, "Can we hear the recording?" I pull out my phone and I play the audio, and the room goes silent. When it finishes, Deborah says, "That is out of context." I say, "What context?" She says, "I was explaining the enforcement process. I never said I could order a tow without authorization." I rewind the audio and I play the part where she says, "We can tow first and explain later. That is how enforcement works." The room is silent again, and then Marcus stands up and says, "I have screenshots of Deborah making similar threats to at least 4 other residents, and I have copies of fake violation stickers she has been placing on cars without any board approval." He walks up and hands Gerald a stack of printed screenshots, and Gerald flips through them, and his face goes pale. He says, "Deborah, did you place these stickers?" Deborah says, "Those are official violation notices." Marcus says, "No, they are not. They are generic stickers from Amazon. I found the same ones online for $12. Gerald says, "Is this true?" Deborah says, "I was trying to enforce the rules. The management company was not responding fast enough, so I took action." Gerald says, "You do not have the authority to take action. Only the management company can issue violation notices." Deborah says, "I am the social committee chair. I have enforcement authority." Gerald says, "No, you do not. The bylaws are clear, and you just admitted on tape that you were planning to order a tow without authorization." Deborah stands up and says, "This is ridiculous. I am trying to protect this community from people who do not follow the rules. And you are attacking me for doing my job. I say, your job is not to harass residents and make up rules. She snaps at me and says, you do not get to talk to me like that. I say, and you do not get to threaten to tow my car without authority. Gerald bangs the gavel and says, that is enough, Deborah. Sit down. She does not sit. She says, if you do not back me up on this, I will resign. And good luck running this association without me. The room is silent, and then someone in the back says, maybe that would not be such a bad thing. Someone else says, she has been doing this for years. It is about time someone called her out. Deborah looks around the room, and I can see her realizing she does not have the support she thought she did. She says, fine, I resign, effective immediately. She grabs her purse and she walks out, and the room erupts in whispers. If you are enjoying this story, hit that like button and subscribe for more HOA horror stories. Gerald bangs the gavel again and says, order, order, we still need to address the issue at hand. Ryan, I apologize for the harassment you have experienced, and I want to assure you that your temp permit is valid and your car will not be towed. I say thank you, and I would also like to request that the board review all recent violation notices issued by Deborah to make sure no other residents have been targeted. Gerald says, agreed. We will conduct a full audit of enforcement actions over the past 6 months, and we will issue refunds for any fines that were improperly assessed. Marcus stands up again and says, I also want to request that the board implement a formal complaint process so residents have a way to report abuse without fear of retaliation. Gerald says, that is a good idea. We will work with the management company to draft a policy, and we will present it at the next meeting. The meeting ends, and I walk outside, and I see Deborah sitting in her car in the parking lot with her hands on the wheel. She is not moving. She is just staring straight ahead, and I can see her jaw clenched tight. I do not say anything. I just walk to my car, and I drive home. The next morning, I get an email from the management company, and it says they are conducting an audit of all enforcement actions taken by Deborah Moore over the past year, and they are suspending all pending violations until the audit is complete. The email also says they are offering refunds to any resident who was charged a fine based on Deborah's enforcement actions, and they are implementing a new policy that requires all violation notices to be reviewed by the management company before they are issued. I forward the email to Marcus, and he texts back, you did it? She is done. I say, do you think she will come back? He says no. She resigned in front of everyone, and the board is not going to let her back after what you exposed. I feel a weight lift off my chest, but I also know this is not over yet, because Deborah is not the type of person who walks away quietly. 2 days later, I am at the gas station filling up my car, and I see Deborah pull up to the pump next to me. She gets out, and she does not look at me, but I know she sees me because she is standing about 3 feet away. I finish filling up, and I walk toward the cashier to pay, and she follows me inside. I pay, and I turn around, and she is standing right behind me, blocking the exit. She says, you ruined my reputation. I say, you ruined your own reputation. I just showed people what you were doing. She says, I was enforcing the rules. I say, you were making up rules and harassing people. She says, you do not know what it is like to run an HOA. Everyone wants special treatment. Everyone thinks the rules do not apply to them. And if you do not enforce them, the whole community falls apart. I say, maybe, but that does not give you the right to threaten people and lie about your authority. She says, I never lied. I pull out my phone and I pull up the recording, and I say, you said the bylaws were updated to give you enforcement authority, but they were not. And you said you could tow my car without authorization, but you could not. So which part of that is not a lie? She stares at me for a long time, and then she says, you should have just moved your car. I say, it was in my own driveway, with a valid permit. There was nothing to move. She says, you were trying to make a point. I say no, I was trying to park my car, and you turned it into a war. She steps closer and she says, you think you won, but you did not, because now everyone in that community is going to do whatever they want. And when the property values drop and the neighborhood turns into a mess, you will realize you should have supported me. I say, or maybe people will just follow the actual rules instead of the ones you made up. She says nothing, and then she turns and walks out. I watch her drive away, and I realize she still thinks she was right, and she is never going to admit she was wrong. I let her talk, because every word was helping me, and I knew at some point she was going to say something I could use, and she just did. She just admitted that she was enforcing rules that did not exist because she thought the community needed her to, and that is exactly the kind of thinking that got her in trouble in the first place. I drive home, and I get another email from the management company, and this one is a bombshell. The email says they have completed a preliminary review of Deborah's enforcement actions, and they have found multiple instances where she issued violation notices without board approval, ordered tow trucks without authorization, and misrepresented county ordinances to residents. The email also says they are referring the matter to the regional supervisor for further investigation, and they are recommending that the board adopt a formal policy prohibiting individual board members from taking enforcement actions without management company approval. I forward the email to Marcus and he calls me immediately. He says, this is huge. They are basically admitting she was acting outside her authority, and they are covering their own backs by blaming her. I say, what happens now? He says, the regional supervisor is going to review everything, and if they find that Deborah violated the bylaws or broke any laws, they could remove her from the board permanently, and they could even pursue legal action if any residents were harmed by her actions. I say, do you think anyone will file a complaint? He says, I already did, and I know at least 3 other people who are planning to file this week. I feel a knot in my stomach because I know this is going to get ugly, but I also know it is the right thing to do. Deborah has been getting away with this for years, and someone needed to stop her. The next week, I get a notice in the mail that there is a special board meeting scheduled for the following Monday, and the agenda includes a vote on the management company's enforcement policy recommendations. I text Marcus, and I say, are you going? He says, absolutely, I want to see how this plays out. Monday night, I drive to the clubhouse, and the parking lot is packed. I see at least 30 cars, which is 3 times the usual turnout, and I realize people are coming out because they want to see what happens. I walk into the meeting room, and every seat is taken, and people are standing along the walls. Marcus waves at me from the front row, and I sit down next to him. Gerald bangs the gavel and says, we are here to vote on a new enforcement policy recommended by the management company, and we are also here to address several complaints that have been filed against former social committee chair Deborah Moore. Someone in the back says, "Where is Deborah?" Gerald says, "She resigned 2 weeks ago, and she is not a member of this board anymore." Someone else says, "Good, she should have been gone years ago." Gerald reads the new enforcement policy out loud, and it says all violation notices must be reviewed and approved by the management company before they are issued. All tow actions must be authorized in writing by the management company, and all fines must be assessed according to the fine schedule in the by-laws with no exceptions. The policy also says any board member who violates these procedures will be removed from the board immediately. Gerald says, "All in favor?" Every board member raises their hand. Gerald says, "The motion passes. The new enforcement policy is now in effect." The room erupts in applause, and I see people smiling and clapping. Marcus leans over and says, "You did this. You forced them to fix it." I say, "We did this. You helped just as much as I did." He says, "Yeah, but you were the one who stood up first." Gerald bangs the gavel again and says, "We also need to address the complaints that have been filed against Deborah Moore. We have received formal complaints from 4 residents alleging harassment, unauthorized enforcement actions, and misrepresentation of HOA authority, and we have referred all of these complaints to the regional supervisor for investigation." Someone in the back says, "What happens if the investigation finds she broke the law?" Gerald says, "Then the matter will be referred to the appropriate authorities, and the association will cooperate fully with any legal proceedings." Someone else says, "Will we get refunds for the fines she issued?" Gerald says, "Yes, the management company is processing refunds for all fines that were issued without proper authorization, and you should receive your refunds within 30 days. The room erupts in applause again, and I feel a weight lift off my shoulders. This is what I wanted. I wanted the HOA to stop selective enforcement and start treating everyone fairly, and it is finally happening. But then Gerald says, "There is one more thing. We have received a resignation letter from our current management company. They are terminating their contract effective in 60 days, and we need to find a new management company before the contract expires." The room goes silent, and someone says, "Why are they resigning?" Gerald says, "They did not give a specific reason, but I suspect it has something to do with the enforcement issues we have been dealing with. They do not want to be associated with the controversy." Marcus leans over and says, "Or they are scared they are going to get sued." I say, "What does this mean for us?" He says, "It means the board is going to have to find a new management company, and that could take months, and in the meantime, the HOA is going to be in chaos." I feel a knot in my stomach because I realize this is not over. It is just beginning, and the fallout from Deborah's actions is going to last a lot longer than anyone expected. 2 weeks later, I am sitting in my living room, working on some estimates, when I get a call from an unknown number. I answer, and a woman says, "Is this Ryan Carter?" I say, "Yes." She says, "My name is Linda. I am the regional supervisor for the property management company, and I am calling about the complaints filed against Deborah Moore." I sit up straight, and I say, "Okay." She says, "I have completed my investigation, and I have found that Deborah violated multiple sections of the association bylaws, including unauthorized enforcement actions, misrepresentation of authority, and harassment of residents. And I am recommending that the board take immediate action to ensure this does not happen again." I say, "What kind of action?" She says, The board has already adopted a new enforcement policy, which is a good start, but I am also recommending that they conduct a full audit of all enforcement actions taken over the past 2 years and issue refunds to any resident who was improperly fined. I say, that sounds like a lot of work. She says, it is, but it is necessary, because if the board does not address this now, they could face legal action from residents who were harmed by Deborah's actions. I say, what about the management company resignation? She says, that is a separate issue, but I can tell you that the management company resigned because they did not want to be held liable for Deborah's actions, and they are concerned that the board did not provide adequate oversight. I say, so what happens now? She says, the board is in the process of interviewing new management companies, and they should have a new contract in place within the next 60 days, and in the meantime, I am going to serve as the interim manager to ensure that enforcement actions are handled properly. I feel a weight lift off my chest. I say thank you. I appreciate you taking this seriously. She says, you did the right thing by filing a complaint, and I want you to know that the management company takes these issues very seriously, and we are committed to making sure that all residents are treated fairly. I hang up, and I text Marcus, and I say, the regional supervisor just called. She is taking over as interim manager, and she is conducting a full audit. He texts back, that is great news, but I bet Deborah is going to fight back. I say, how? He says, she is not the type to just walk away. She is going to try to discredit you and make it look like you are the problem. I say, how do you know? He texts back a screenshot from the neighborhood group chat, and it is a post from Deborah that says, I resigned because I was being harassed by a new resident who wanted special treatment, and when I enforced the rules, he filed false complaints to get me removed. If you care about this community, you will stand up to bullies like him. I read the post 3 times, and I feel my hands shaking. I text Marcus back and I say, she is calling me a bully? He says, yeah, and she is trying to turn the neighborhood against you. But do not worry, most people see through it. I say, what do I do? He says, nothing. Let her dig her own hole. The more she talks, the worse she looks. I put my phone down and I try to focus on work, but I cannot stop thinking about Deborah's post. I know she is lying, and I know most people know she is lying, but I also know that some people will believe her, because that is how these things work. That night, I get a knock on my door, and I open it, and I see 2 neighbors standing there, a man and a woman I have seen around but never talked to. The man says, hi, we are Tom and Linda. We live 2 buildings over, and we wanted to thank you for standing up to Deborah. I say, you do not need to thank me. Linda says, yes, we do. She has been harassing us for over a year. She fined us 3 times for parking violations that did not exist, and we did not know how to fight back. And then you showed us how. Tom says, we filed a complaint with the regional supervisor, and we are getting a refund for all the fines she charged us. Linda says, we just wanted you to know that we appreciate what you did, and we are sorry you had to deal with her harassment. I say, thank you. That means a lot. They leave, and I close the door, and I realize that Deborah's post is not going to work, because too many people know the truth, and they are not going to let her rewrite history. The next morning, I am walking to my car, and I see a portable folding sign stand being planted near the space, with no readable text on the sign. And I realize Someone is setting up for something. I look around and I see the tow truck driver from before, and he is standing by his truck talking to Linda, the regional supervisor. I walk over and I say, "What is going on?" Linda says, "We are conducting a walkthrough of the parking lot to document all the current violations, and we are going to use this as a baseline for the new enforcement policy." I say, "Why is the tow truck here?" She says, "We are not towing anyone today. The driver is here to consult on the towing procedures so we can make sure the new policy complies with state law." The tow truck driver nods at me and says, "I remember you. You were the guy who stopped me from hooking your car." I say, "Yeah, that was me." He says, "You did the right thing, because Deborah never gave me a signed authorization. She just kept saying she had verbal authority, and I knew that was not enough, so I refused to hook your car." I say, "I appreciate that." He says, "I see this kind of thing all the time. HOAs hire us to do their dirty work, and then when it goes wrong, they blame us. So I always make sure I have a signed authorization before I hook anything." Linda says, "That is exactly the kind of procedure we need to document, because the new policy requires a signed authorization from the management company before any tow action is taken. And the authorization has to include the vehicle description, the reason for the tow, and the name of the person authorizee, NG it." I say, "That sounds like a good policy." She says, "It is, and it is going to prevent situations like yours from happening again." I walk back to my car, and I see Deborah's car parked in the guest lot, and I realize she is still living here even though she resigned from the board. I feel a knot in my stomach because I know she is not going to let this go, and I know she is going to keep trying to make my life difficult. That night, I get another email from the management company, and this one says they have completed the audit, and they have identified 23 enforcement actions taken by Deborah Moore that violated the bylaws. And they are issuing refunds totaling over $4,000 to residents who were early fined. The email also says they are implementing the new enforcement policy immediately, and they are training all board members on the proper procedures for issuing violation notices and authorizing tow actions. I forward the email to Marcus, and he calls me immediately. He says, "This is it. This is the proof that she was running a scam. She was fining people left and right without any authority, and the management company is covering their own backs by refunding everything." I say, "Do you think she is going to face any legal consequences?" He says, "Maybe, if anyone files a lawsuit, but most people are just happy to get their money back and move on." I say, "What about the neighborhood group chat post?" He says, "Ignore it. She is just trying to save face. And it is not working. Everyone can see the audit results, and they know she was lying." I hang up, and I sit down at my kitchen table, and I realize this is finally over. Deborah is gone. The management company is fixing the enforcement process, and people are getting their money back. I did what I set out to do, and I did not have to break any rules or do anything illegal. But then I get a text from Marcus that says, "Check the group chat. Someone just shared something." I open the group chat, and I see a post from someone named Jennifer, and it says, "I just got off the phone with the management company, and they told me that Deborah Moore has filed a defamation lawsuit against Ryan Carter, claiming he made false statements about her during the board meeting." I stare at my phone, and I feel my chest tighten. I text Marcus, and I say, "Is this real?" He calls me immediately and says, "I do not know, but if it is, you need to get a lawyer right now." I say, "I did not make any false statements. I just presented the evidence." He says, "I know, but she is trying to intimidate you, and even if the lawsuit is frivolous, you still need to defend yourself." I hang up and I call the regional supervisor, Linda, and I say, "Did Deborah Moore file a defamation lawsuit against me?" She says, "I cannot confirm or deny that, but if she did, you should consult with an attorney, and you should also know that the management company will support you if you need to provide evidence that your statements were accurate." I say, "So it is real?" She says, "I cannot comment on pending legal matters, but I can tell you that the management company has reviewed all of the evidence you provided, and we believe your statements were accurate and supported by the documentation." I hang up and I sit down on my couch, and I feel like I am going to be sick. I did everything right. I followed the rules. I presented the evidence, and now I am getting sued for it. I text Marcus and I say, "I need a lawyer." He texts back, "I know a guy. I will send you his contact info." 10 minutes later, I get a text with the name and number of a lawyer named Paul, who specializes in HOA disputes and defamation cases. I call him immediately and I explain the situation, and he says, "Do not worry. Defamation cases like this almost never succeed, especially when you have documentation to back up your statements. And it sounds like you have a lot of documentation." I say, "So what do I do?" He says, "First, do not talk to Deborah. Do not respond to any messages from her. And do not post anything about this on social media or the neighborhood group chat. Second, send me all the documentation you have, including the county email, the recording, the violation notices, and the management company audit results. And third, wait for her to actually file the lawsuit, because right now, this might just be a threat." I say, "What if she does file?" He says, "Then we will file a motion to dismiss, and if that does not work, we will go to discovery, and we will use her own words and actions against her. And I promise you, she is not going to look good in front of a judge." I hang up and I send him all the documentation I have, and then I sit down and I try to calm down. I know Paul is right. I know Deborah is just trying to intimidate me, but I also know that lawsuits are expensive and stressful, and I do not want to go through this. 2 weeks go by, and I do not hear anything from Deborah or her lawyer, and I start to think maybe it was just a threat. But then I get a certified letter in the mail, and it is a notice of intent to file a defamation lawsuit, and it says Deborah is claiming I made false and defamatory statements about her during the board meeting, and she is seeking $50,000 in damages. I read the letter 3 times, and I feel my hands shaking. I call Paul immediately, and I say, "I just got a notice of intent." He says, "Good. Now we know it is real. Send me a copy of the letter, and I will draft a response." I scan the letter, and I email it to him, and he calls me back an hour later. He says, "This is a joke. She is claiming you defamed her by presenting evidence that she violated the bylaws. But the evidence is documented and supported by the management company audit, so she has no case." I say, "So what do we do?" He says, "We send her a response letter explaining that your statements were accurate and supported by evidence, and we warn her that if she files this lawsuit, we will file a counterclaim for abuse of process, and we will seek attorney fees." I say, "Will that stop her?" He says, "Maybe, but if it does not, we will be ready." Paul sends the response letter, and 2 weeks go by, and I do not hear anything. I start to think maybe Deborah realized she did not have a case, and she dropped it. But then I get another text from Marcus that says, "Check the group chat." I open the chat, and I see a post from Jennifer that says, "Deborah Moore withdrew her defamation lawsuit, and the management company just announced that she is no longer allowed to serve on any HOA committees or boards in the future." I stare at my phone, and I feel a rush of relief. I text Marcus, and I say, "It is over?" He says, "It is over. She is done." I sit down on my couch, and I let out a long breath. This whole thing started because I parked my car in my own driveway with a temporary permit, and it turned into a 6-week nightmare where I was threatened with towing, harassed with fake violation notices, and sued for defamation. But I did not back down. I documented everything. I presented the evidence, and I forced the HOA to stop selective enforcement after complaints pile up. The next day, I get an email from the management company, and it says they have hired a new permanent management company, and the new company is implementing a transparent enforcement process with clear procedures and resident appeals. The email also says the board has adopted a resolution prohibiting Deborah Moore from serving on any committee or board in the future, and they have issued formal apologies to all residents who were improperly fined. I forward the email to Marcus, and he texts back, "You did it. You changed the whole system." I say, "We did it. You helped just as much as I did." He says, "Yeah, but you were the one who took the risk, and you were the one who stood up when everyone else was too scared." I do not know what to say, so I just text back, "Thank you." That night, I am sitting in my living room when I get a knock on my door. I open it, and I see Tom and Linda again, and they are holding a plate of cookies. Linda says, "We wanted to thank you again, and we wanted to let you know that we organized a neighborhood petition, and we got over 50 signatures supporting the new enforcement policy and calling for the board to conduct regular audits." I say, "That is amazing." Tom says, "We presented the petition at the last board meeting, and they voted unanimously to adopt all of our recommendations, and they also voted to remove Deborah's name from the social committee founder plaque in the clubhouse." Linda says, "We could not have done any of this without you, so thank you." I take the cookies and I say, "I appreciate that, and I am glad we were able to fix things." They leave, and I close the door, and I sit down and I eat a cookie, and I realize that this whole thing was not just about parking rules. It was about standing up to a system that was broken and forcing it to change. 2 months later, I am walking through the parking lot, and I see a new sign near the entrance that says all enforcement actions are subject to review by the management company, and residents have the right to appeal any violation notice within 10 days. I stop and I read the sign, and I feel a sense of pride because I know I helped make that happen. I also see Deborah's car is gone from the guest lot, and I realize she must have moved out. I do not know where she went, and I do not care, because she is not my problem anymore. I walk to my car, and I see a brand new permanent parking decal in my windshield, and I realize the management company finally issued it. I get in my car, and I drive to work, and I think about how close I came to losing my car over a temporary permit, and how one person's abuse of power almost ruined my life. But I also think about how I fought back, and how I won, and how the HOA is better now, because I refused to back down. 3 months later, I am sitting in another board meeting, and the board is voting on a proposal to hire an independent auditor to review all enforcement actions on a quarterly basis. Gerald says, "All in favor?" Every board member raises their hand. Gerald says, "The motion passes, and starting next quarter, we will have independent oversight of all enforcement actions." The room erupts in applause, and I see Marcus grinning at me from across the room. After the meeting, he walks over and says, "You know what the best part of all this is?" I say, "What?" He says, "Deborah thought she was untouchable. She thought she could do whatever she wanted, because she had been here for 10 years and everyone was scared of her. But you proved that one person with evidence and determination can take down an entire corrupt system." I say, "I do not know if I would call it corrupt." He says, "It was corrupt. She was fining people without authority. She was threatening to tow cars without authorization. And she was using her position to bully people she did not like. And the board let her do it because they did not want to deal with her. And that is corruption." I do not argue, because I know he is right. A week later, I get a final email from the management company, and it says the audit is complete. And they have issued a total of 47 refunds to residents who were improperly fined by Deborah Moore over the past 2 years. And the total amount refunded is over $8,000. The email also says the board has adopted a zero-tolerance policy for unauthorized enforcement actions, and any board member who violates the policy will be removed immediately. I read the email, and I realize this is the end of the story. Deborah is gone. The management company is fixed. The enforcement process is transparent, and people are getting their money back. I did what I set out to do, and I did not have to break any rules or do anything illegal. But the best part is what happened at the final board meeting. I was not planning to go, but Marcus texted me and said I had to see this, so I drove to the clubhouse and I walked into the meeting room, and it was packed again. Gerald banged the gavel and said, "We have one final item on the agenda. We have received a neighbor petition that forces a vote during the meeting on whether to terminate our contract with the current management company and hire a new one that specializes in transparent enforcement and resident rights." Someone in the back said, "I thought we already hired a new management company?" Gerald said, "We did, but this petition is asking us to go one step further and hire a company that has a track record of preventing exactly the kind of abuse we just dealt with." The room erupted in discussion, and then Gerald called for a vote. He said, "All in favor of terminating the current contract and hiring a new management company?" Every hand in the room went up except one. Gerald said, "The motion passes, and I am also announcing that I am stepping down as board president effective immediately because I failed to provide adequate oversight during Deborah's tenure, and I take responsibility for that." The room went silent, and then someone started clapping, and then everyone was clapping. Gerald stepped down from the front table and walked to the back of the room, and someone else stood up and said, "I nominate Marcus for board president." Marcus looked shocked, and then he looked at me, and I nodded. He stood up and said, "I accept." The room voted, and Marcus was elected unanimously, and after the meeting he walked over to me and said, "I could not have done this without you." I said, "You are going to do great." He said, "I am going to make sure this never happens again." And then the final piece fell into place. The new management company came in, and within 2 weeks they fired the old tow vendor and hired a new one that required signed authorizations for every tow. And they installed cameras in the parking lot so residents could review footage if they got a violation notice. They also implemented an online portal where residents could see all enforcement actions in real time, and they hired a compliance officer whose only job was to make sure the board followed the bylaws. But the moment that really sealed it was at the next board meeting when a resident stood up and asked what happened to Deborah Moore, and Marcus said, "She is no longer a resident here. She sold her unit and moved out of state." Someone asked, "Why?" Marcus said, "Because she realized she was not welcome here anymore, and because the new management company made it clear that if she stayed, she would be subject to the same enforcement rules as everyone else, and she could not handle that." The room erupted in laughter, and I saw two neighbors whispering while pointing at the chalk marks by the tires in the parking lot, where Deborah used to measure cars with a tape measure to find violations. And that was it. That was the moment when Karen's smug smile vanishes, when the room turns on her, and when the HOA stops selective enforcement after complaints pile up, and when Karen loses her committee role immediately because a neighbor petition that forces a vote during the meeting made it impossible for her to stay. I force Karen to answer a yes or no question, then drop the document that contradicts her, and the whole thing unravels from there. The trump card was a recording where Karen claims authority she does not legally have in clear terms, and once I played that recording in front of the board and the regional supervisor, she had no way to defend herself. The twist was when the management company regional supervisor admits in writing that Karen is not authorized to order tows, and that was the final nail in the coffin, because it proved that everything she had been telling residents for years was a lie. And the outcome was exactly what I hoped for. The management company gets fired on the spot, and the board hires an interim manager who freezes enforcement until an audit finishes, and they refuse to show the paperwork that Deborah claimed gave her authority, because it never existed in the first place. I am sitting in my living room now writing this, and my car is parked in my driveway, with the permanent decal in the windshield, and I have not gotten a single violation notice in 4 months. Marcus is doing a great job as board president, and the new management company is transparent and fair, and people actually trust the HOA now. Deborah is gone, and good riddance. She thought she could bully me into giving up. But I had evidence. I had allies, and I had the law on my side. She underestimated me, and it cost her everything. The final showdown happened exactly where I knew it would. The clubhouse parking lot with my car half lifted and the tow truck idling was the moment when everything came to a head. I had been waiting for Deborah to make her final move, and when she called the tow truck and ordered them to hook my car, I was ready. I walked out with my phone recording and I said, "Show me the signed authorization." The tow truck driver said, "I do not have one." She said she has verbal authority. I said, "She does not, and if you hook my car, I am calling the police." The driver looked at Deborah, and she said, "Just do it." I said, "Do you want to be part of a theft complaint?" The driver put his winch cable down, and he said, "I am not hooking anything without a signed authorization." Deborah screamed at him and said, "I am ordering you to hook that car right now." He got in his truck, and he drove away, and Deborah stood there in the parking lot screaming at me, and I just stood there and let her scream, because I knew she was done. And she was. A week later, she was gone, and the HOA was finally free. I learned a lot from this whole experience. I learned that standing up to bullies is worth it, even when it is scary. I learned that documentation is everything, because without evidence, you are just making accusations. And I learned that one person can make a difference, as long as they are willing to fight for what is right. If you are dealing with an HOA that is abusing its power, do not give up. Document everything, find allies, and do not be afraid to stand up for yourself. The system is not perfect, but it can be fixed, and you can be the one who fixes it. Thanks for watching. I will see you in the next HOA story.